Well, the situation at the Fukushima plant is seeing comparisons drawn to the Chernobyl nuclear explosion, which was the world's worst atomic plant disaster. It happened 25 years ago in Ukraine, but the effects of the contamination are still felt today. Well, let's talk now to our correspondents, Alexei Yereshevsky, who's in Kiev, and Peter Oliver, who's in Moscow for us. First to you, Alexei, in Ukraine. We can, of course, see that white plume of smoke over the Fukushima plant from the footage we've been getting in during the day. What can we infer from that?
Well, it is really hard to judge yet what this white smoke was caused by, but definitely it reminds us of what happened 25 years ago, quarter of a century, in the Ukrainian town of Chernobyl. Back then, of course, it was the USSR. Now it's part of sovereign Ukraine. The white smoke was indeed coming out of the cracked open reactor after the explosion, which happened early in the morning on April 26, 1986. Indeed, the accident which is now taking place in Japan, it looks like just like the Chernobyl accident, with one exception that in Japan there's far more of this white smoke coming out of the reactor, as we've seen at the different pictures shown by the Japanese television all throughout the day. It is hard to say what caused this explosion yet. We have had no official explanation so far. We've heard a version that it was caused by some explosion of hydrogen cooling systems inside the nuclear facility, but it is really hard to say whether this was so. I've been to several nuclear plants myself, and I've seen those cooling systems. It's hard to imagine that they could produce an explosion like that, as we've seen on the footage from the Japanese television. So of course we're all waiting for some viable explanation of what the explosion was caused by from the Japanese government.
OK, let's cross over to Peter now, who's in Moscow for us. Peter, Russia, it has experience, doesn't it, in dealing with such serious atomic emergencies. Has any help been offered to Japan yet?
Well, that's right. The experience gained and the lessons learned from dealing with the 1986 Chernobyl disaster will put Russia in a key seat if it comes to the request coming for any help with dealing with the cleanup of the situation at Fukushima #1. Now, as of yet, Russia has sent humanitarian aid to Japan and promised more if that's needed. However, there has been no request for or no offer of assistance when it comes to the containing and cleaning up of this kind of nuclear disaster that we're seeing here. However, that doesn't rule out the possibility of it coming in the future. If we looked at Japan's own systems that they have in place, will be stretched to the limit at the moment. It's not just Fukushima that has problems. A state of disaster has been declared at many reactors across Japan. So the Japanese authorities will be stretched to the limit, and as that continues, the possibility of outside help being requested, especially from countries like Russia, who have this experience of dealing with and of containing a nuclear disaster, that becomes more and more likely.
OK, many thanks, Peter. Let's cross back to you, Alexei, over in Ukraine for us. At this stage, are there any other similarities that we know of between the incident at Fukushima and that of Chernobyl?
Well, obviously this white smoke coming from the reactor building is the only obvious resemblance which we can see between the two incidents 25 years ago in Chernobyl and at the Fukushima power plant nowadays. That's where the similarities end. The situations are basically different simply because what caused them. You know, the fallout in Chernobyl was caused by a massive human error. What is happening now in Japan is, of course, a result of a natural disaster. The earthquake which happened on Friday, and the other big difference, and this is a very significant difference between the two events, is how the government has been responding to the events. Obviously, 25 years ago, the Soviet government kept most of the information secret from the general population in Russia as well as from the rest of the world. It went on a massive secret campaign to just safeguard this information. And this is something which we cannot see today, because the Japanese government, even though we have conflicting reports coming from the island of what's happening there, and we have no certainty of what caused this blast, still the Japanese government ordered the evacuation of people from the surrounding areas at the Fukushima region. This didn't happen 25 years ago when 50,000 residents of the town of Pripyat next to the Chernobyl power plant were kept in the town for more than 24 hours, and this of course caused some damage to them. The people were subjected to a great deal of radioactive threat coming from the open reactor. Of course, these mistakes were learned, the mistakes made by the Soviet government, and this is what the Japanese government is hopefully trying to avoid right now. But clearly the situations in Chernobyl and at Fukushima 1 are different, despite what we can see in the pictures from the Japanese television.
Well, Alexei, there are fears, of course, of a nuclear meltdown at the Fukushima plant. Can you explain what that means?
Well, the meltdown itself, the nuclear meltdown itself, is a very scary thing for all scientists, as I've been calling it their worst nightmare ever. Indeed, this meltdown is all about the core of the reactor going into an uncontrollable state and thus causing a nuclear chain reaction first and then a powerful steam explosion like it happened in Chernobyl. This is like a rodeo. It's trying to control a crazy horse because nobody knows whether you would be able to get the reactor back under control or not. This did not happen in Chernobyl. This was a result of a failed experiment when the scientists, when the personnel of the power station tried to lower the output of the reactor and then bring it to a temporary halt. When the reactor started behaving in an uncontrollable fashion, some of the personnel pressed the emergency brake button, as we can call it, and just 49 seconds since the start of the experiment, the reactor exploded, and that caused the fallout and the contamination of great areas all along the former Soviet USSR. So obviously, as we've been hearing from the Japanese authorities right now, the reactor stays intact. It's not been damaged according to the authorities, and we hopefully think that such contamination as it happened 25 years ago in Chernobyl would be avoided this time. But of course, we'll have to wait and see what happens next with all this developing story.
Indeed. One development we do know is that the IAEA is saying that the Japanese authorities are making preparations to distribute iodine to residents near the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Peter, let's cross back to you now, right here in Moscow. Russia's Far East, well, it lies just a few dozen kilometres over the sea from northern Japan. So what measures are being taken there and how worried are people?
Well, that's right. Russia's territory lies very, very close to Japan and very close to, of course, to where this nuclear disaster has taken place. Now, we've seen a partial evacuation of the Kuril Islands. There's also high alert status in Sakhalin and Russia's Far East. Of course, the major city there, Vladivostok, many people living in that city will be very concerned about how close they are to this disaster that's taken place in northeastern Japan. Now, as it stands at the moment, authorities in Russia's territory are saying they've seen no increase in the levels of radiation recorded in either the Kuril Islands, Sakhalin, or Russia's Far Eastern seaboard. Now, the main thing that needs to be watched for this, and what all of the Russian authorities and people on the ground there will be looking at, is the weather. The one thing that we can't put in place, you can try and close the reactor, you can cover it with concrete, you can try and do whatever you can to stop radiation leaking, but if radiation gets out into the atmosphere, into the air, then it can be carried anywhere by the weather. So all eyes will be looking to see if winds are moving towards Russia or away from Russia, or where they are heading would take any radiation that would be up in the atmosphere. So everybody very concerned and keeping a watchful eye over the conditions of the weather that we will see at the moment. Now, we heard that the Russian authorities are apparently not getting as much information out of Japan as they would really be happy with concerning the situation at Fukushima. Now, the Russian authorities are planning for all possible outcomes from that nuclear reactor there. They are planning to for any foreseeable outcome that would include, I guess, any kind of full-scale meltdown and subsequent explosion and output of radiation that would come from that meltdown. So everything being considered here in Russia, of course, dealing directly and in consultation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and hopefully trying to gain any information that they can give to their citizens, the Russian citizens on the in the far east of the country, in order to keep them safe and protected should there be any potential risk from radiation.
OK, Peter, many thanks for that. Many thanks to both of you, Alexei Yedashevsky, who we were speaking to earlier in Ukraine, and Peter Oliver, who's here in Moscow for us.